Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Conversations with Courageous Cancer Warriors. I am so excited for our guest today. She is a pharmacist turned a binge and emotional eating coach, and her focus is to create positive relationships with food and your body. Please welcome Marisabelle Bonnici. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I am so excited to have this conversation. I think it's really important to really dive in and to get real about the issues that happen with eating. So first and foremost, how did you get to where you are today?
Well, it was my own story that brought me here. Actually, I'm into healthcare, so health was always important for me. But I found myself taking care of everybody else's health, but never my own. And 3.5 years ago, I hit my heaviest weight ever. I was 150 kilos, which is around 340 pounds, I believe. And it sort of struck me that I couldn't keep on going in this self-destructive spiral, taking care of everybody else's health and not my own. Yeah. So I sold my pharmacy, and I went on a year of self-discovery, traveling the world, studying more about the mind, trying to understand what was going on, why I was having this very dysfunctional relationship with food and with my body. And that brought me to learning more about eating disorders and today help women deal with binge eating and emotional eating.
Wow, that is amazing. And kudos to you, right? It's a scary thing to leave a life that you knew and to recreate yourself. That's something we really talk a lot about here because, once you go through a crisis or a trauma or you're faced with the reality, you have two choices. You could either ignore it or you can move forward and learn from it. And that's exactly what you did. So what gave you the courage to be like, okay, enough, I need to do something different?
Well, there were two things actually. When it came to my own relationship with food, I had a patient come into the pharmacy over here in Malta. The pharmacist is the first point of care for most patients. Okay. So he came in and I tried his sugar and his blood pressure and his cholesterol, and everything was through the roof. So I was giving him advice about how to take care of his health. He was really, really polite. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes was sort of like, you're giving me advice, why aren't you taking your own advice? Yeah. And it went home and it struck a chord, and that's when I started yet another millionth diet that I have done. And I did lose some weight, and then a bad thing happened and I ended up binging again. And I started exploring more about binge and emotional eating. And then about a year later, I had a very bad experience. I ate some food that was contaminated with rat poison, and I ended up in hospital, attached to an IV, and the doctors were really worried because I was very, very unwell, and it took quite a few weeks for me to be able to get it out of my system. And I realized that this isn't the life I want to live anymore. It wasn't worth it to be unhappy in a place, and it was leading me to eat, and it was leading to effects on my health. So that's why I sold my pharmacy, because I decided that I had to put myself first.
Yeah, and that's very scary, right? Being hospitalized, knowing that, it could go two ways. You could be absolutely okay, or it could go south quickly, right? Like, so you had a moment where you faced your mortality.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, the doctors told me that I was lucky in that I was so big. Because if I was that big, it didn't have that much of a traumatic effect on me. But had I been much slimmer, it would have probably been much worse for me at the dose that it was consumed.
Yeah.
So being big sort of saved my life at the same time.
Yeah.
But that's when I realized that my life was precious and I needed to take care of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so from there you had, that's like what I like to call the aha moment, right? Like where you're like, okay, something needs to change. So you sold your pharmacy. You said you went on a year of self-discovery. And what was that year like for you?
Well, I was traveling a lot of the time on my own. I didn't really love myself at that point, so my mindset was really negative. All I could see was all the negative things coming to me, and I wanted to change that. So I started exploring new forms of exercise and meditation and yoga and breath work. And I started falling in love with myself again. And that was the start of everything, because then I met a guy who today is my fiance, and I'm helping people in their own journey. So I had to first fall in love with myself before I could actually heal my relationship with food and anything else around me.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about setting up a good morning routine. So did you stick with the meditation, journaling, exercise? Is that still part of your everyday?
I do a lot of breath work. I find it really helps the fact that I unhook my mind and I let my body actually feel what it has to feel. And the body is really powerful, and we can really heal a lot of emotional trauma if we actually work on it. So that is something I do every single day. I do meditations, but I do more breath work because my mind tends to roam around a million places. So for me, breath work seems to work better. And I do gratitude every morning. I write what I'm grateful for in my journal, and I sit down and I actually have breakfast at the table, which is something I've never used to do before. And I find that it sets the tone for the day in just the right way.
Oh, I love that. And I actually really like that. I never really thought about taking the moment to sit down, have breakfast. What we do in my household, and I think, you just inspired me to kind of change it a bit, because we have a routine where before we even pick up phones, we will do meditation, we will journal, and we'll have a cup of coffee as we do that, right? It's kind of like our treat to start the day. But I really love having the breakfast, sitting down. I really, really love that. Now, what you said is so powerful, because you're spot on when you say that the body, is a powerful thing. And by doing the work, you could really heal yourself. So when a client comes to you, and you hear their story about, what they're dealing with, what is usually the first thing that you tell them? And I know everybody's different, but in general, like what's a general theme?
Most of the time, people actually come to me because they are unhappy with their weight.
Okay.
So that's where it generally starts. And most of the time, the conversation always leads to them saying that they cannot live without food because they love food so much. And we talk a little bit about if they really actually did love the food, they would slow down and enjoy it, and not eat it all up in less than 2 minutes and keep on eating and eating and eating without even really tasting the food. And that it generally is not about the food. And food is there for pleasure. So yes, of course, we have to enjoy it. But in case, we are not using it for that.
Yeah. And I was having a conversation yesterday, because my vice, the one thing that I know is so wrong for me and I cannot shake it, is sugar, right? Like I have a relationship with sugar that is just not good. I know as a cancer patient, tumors feed off of sugar. I should not have it. And no matter what I do, I have no willpower to say no to the cookie, right? Like I set myself up powerfully at home where I don't have these things in my house. but then when I get outside of my home and it is readily available to me, especially now it's so warm, you know, ice cream and I, like, we're best friends. We have we have an intimate relationship. So it's something that everybody has their own version. So what would be one thing that you would say to start looking at for something like that?
Well, I think the one thing that I've picked up in what you've said is that there is a bit of fear associated with the sugar. Mm-hmm. So what happens, our brain tries to keep us safe when there is some sort of fear, and trying to keep you safe, it goes towards what gives it comfort. And of course, sugar and cookies, they give your brain comfort because, first of all, they give this hit of sugar and fat, which increases our dopamine in our brain. So it gives us this pleasure response. So it's basically your brain trying to keep you safe. It thinks it's doing you a favor because you're being scared of something. And that's its way of protecting you. It's doing its job. So my advice to you is to sit in that uncomfortable feeling. To sit in it and let it go through you. Let yourself experience it. It is safe for you to experience it. Many times we try and numb down this uncomfortable feeling with something, whether it's food or alcohol or sex. People use different coping mechanisms. Yeah. But we don't really sit with our feelings. And fear, even if it's a very small fear that we're not aware of, actually does cause our brain want comfort.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's something that I'm gonna take on, and I'm gonna circle back with you once I'm like, I have my aha moment of like, oh my God, I understand why I do this. For me, it's been a very long time going pattern. You know, there's not a day that I can't remember where I haven't behaved that way. So stay tuned, because we're going to do that. Now, the other thing I'm really excited to talk about is your new book. You have co-authored a book called Women Who Boss Up. I would love to hear about how that transformed for you.
Well, that came about very, very naturally. I talk a lot about my story online, and I was contacted by Tam, who's the person who she birthed this project, and she was mentioning it to me, and I was telling her about my story, about how I decided that I didn't want to pity myself anymore. I didn't want to feel bad for myself anymore. And I didn't want to live in a world where I didn't look in the mirror, because my mirrors were covered in the house. I didn't want to see myself. Yeah. And that was not something that I wanted for the rest of my life. I wanted to learn to love my life and enjoy my life. So, and there was that pivotal moment for me where everything changed. And today I know why it happened. There is a part of our brain called the reticular activating system. Mm-hmm. This part of our brain, it attracts more of what we think of. So if we think of negativity, it attracts negative things to us. And a very practical example of that is something that parents will definitely understand. When you have a baby, even if you're a very heavy sleeper, if the baby moves, you're going to hear it. Why? Because your brain is going to attract more of that to you. And we do that with everything. And I was doing it with negativity. I was attracting negative people into my life. I was pitying myself all the time. I didn't see a point of being alive anymore. And it was about time that I was up, and I changed my life, and I removed those black colored glasses from in front of my eyes, and I focused on the positive in my life. And when I started doing that, everything started changing. And I loved this book because it had so many other women who have been through the same thing. They've had this pivotal moment where they decided to change their life and the life of those around them. And it's really empowering. And I'm sure that for anyone who's going through a tough time, there's going to be a story in there or two that you're going to resonate with.
Absolutely. And so I have to ask, now that you've been on the other side, now that you're attracting positiveness, positivity within your life, what is the one thing that surprised you the most?
Well, I was single for good 15 years. And in the past year, I have met the most amazing man in the world, and he proposed to me 3 weeks ago. So we are now engaged, and
Oh,
that is.
congratulations.
I would have never imagined it for myself. I always told my friends I was destined to be alone, and once I changed my mindset, look what happened.
Yeah, and what are some of your practices on keeping a positive mindset?
Oh, well, I do the breath work in the
Yeah.
morning, my gratitude. I believe that gratitude is really important, both in the morning and at the end of the day, what I'm grateful for that happens throughout the day. I keep myself accountable. So if there's a day where I was just procrastinating, I will keep myself accountable. But if there's a day where I need to take it easy because my body needs to take it easy, then I do that. And I work out. That makes a huge difference for me. But I actually found exercise which I love doing. And I don't do it for the sake of losing weight or looking hot. I do it because it feels good. And yeah, those are some of the great.
And that's a valid point, right? Like we all have our own versions of what works for us. And that's a key thing of, you know, find what you love, do something because you love doing it because it makes you happy. And not because, you know, joining a, you know, heavyweight lifting competition is what everybody's telling you should do. So that's amazing. And I am so in love with your story and what you're up to and who you are for the world. You have my heart, and I'm truly in love with everything. And, you know, for the people listening today, you can really affect change in your life. You know, we have proven it time and time again that by having a positive mindset, believing in yourself, and just really getting real, get to the core of your behaviors can really alter your life. So is there anything that you would like to leave the listeners with today?
You just need to do one thing a day that makes you uncomfortable. With one thing that makes you uncomfortable, you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, and that is where magic happens. So I challenge you to do that. One thing a day.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And where can people find you?
Well, I'm on Facebook and on Instagram. You can find me as Road to Bell. And I also have a website, same, www.roadtobell.com. I'm very active, especially on Instagram. I love the platform and I share a lot. So I'd love to get in touch with anyone who needs any support.
Oh, that's amazing. And just thank you very much for being here today. This really was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.